Testing, testing. Can you guys hear me? Testing, testing. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I just got sound. Can you guys hear me now? Yes, perfect. Okay. All right, so welcome back. We are diving deep into the timeline again. And like I said last week, we are just going to jump in. If you didn't watch last week's live, you're not necessarily going to be lost, but you may want to check it out if you want to follow along. We're just starting we started at the end of 2017 and are just going to go all the way to current. So where we left off was good old Zulema Pastenis. She was one of the group members. And on November 3rd, now keep in mind, she had just met Lori for the first time on, it was like October 19th. Yeah. So she had just met Lori on October 19th when Lori shared her weirdo testimony at Melanie Gibb's house. And then on November 3rd, so this is just a couple weeks later, she tells Lori that she was told by God that she is to protect her. So let's take a look at that. November 3rd, Zulema tells Lori that she was told by God that she is to protect Lori. This is very strange because, we're talking a 2-week turnaround time. I've talked about this before when I've talked about Zulema, but I think Zulema just desperately wanted to be on the in. She wanted to find her way to the inner part of this group, and she eventually definitely did that because she was the one, in my opinion, who really kind of kicked off this murderous spree, which we'll get to probably in quite a few weeks. But okay, moving along. November 16th to the 17th, Chad spoke at a Preparing a People event in Mesa and stayed with Lori Vallow along with some of their friends at her and Charles' home in Queen Creek. And this was the home that I visited Lori in 2018 as well. It's very clear later on that Charles didn't know that Chad had stayed in his home because he pushed back against that when he intercepted the email between Lori and Chad, which Lori had sent as Charles. And so Charles was like, he never stayed in our home. The other participants who stayed in the home, I know Melanie Gibb was there. I forget who else was there. Zulema, I think. I'm not sure who else stayed with her, but let's open that up. This is just something that I found that confirmed that this Preparing a People event in Mesa occurred November 16th and 17th. All right. On November 17th, so this was the second day of the event, Lori's audio files in her iCloud account show a recorded speech given by Chad Daybell in Arizona. This was obviously that event. So it appears that she recorded his speaking event. And I'm not going to click through to all of these. You can obviously go to my analytics site, pull up the timeline. If you even just search Annie Cushing timeline, it's going to come up. And you can click through to some of these. I mostly just try to click through to them to like give context and things like that. December 4th, Zulema told Chad, this was in a text message, that she started seeing visions and can now control the elements since he gave her a blessing. This is a very, very strange interaction. I'll try to zoom in so everyone can see it. Let's see. Okay. So again, December 4th, this is Zulema. Although, if I ever like forget to include the initials of their names in these screenshots, anything that says sent is Zulema in any of these text messages between Zulema and Chad or Zulema and Lori. Anything that says read is either Lori or Chad. I just love that this is probably like the phone number, but they let you know, okay, this is Chad. Anyway, so Zulema texts Chad, "Hi Chad, this is Zulema." So clearly her first text message to him, she probably got his number when they all stayed in the house. "I have to tell you that since you gave me that blessing, I've been having visions full awake, no more dreams. My visions have been at the temple. I've had 3 so far. One, I was sitting at a very long table with heavenly beings sitting on it, at least 100. I was at the head of the table, and there was a man at the other end. I couldn't see his face, but he was a godlike being. I think I read being shown my posterity and my husband." I don't know exactly what that means, but their second, well, I think that should have been the second one. I was shown the Gilbert Temple becoming a city of light. Today, I was shown how to move my hands to move the elements. I saw myself doing it or remembering doing it. I've also been under attack since the vision started. Now, this is a solid theme with Zulema all throughout these text messages with Chad and Lori. She frequently talks about being under attack. And I think that part of this was her attempt to kind of ingratiate herself to them. So there's like a part of her where she wants them to see her as powerful. She really saw herself as a prophet or a prophetess, I guess you would call it. Uh, and at one point, she even declared some of her family members as like dark ratings. Like she declared her ex-husband, I think she actually specified his dark rating, as well as her daughter's husband, so her son-in-law. She thought that he was a particularly dark spirit. Now, to understand the context here, Chad and Lori didn't care who in her family was a dark spirit. Even when she went to Chile, she thought that some of her family members were dark spirits. And I think you also see this tension in her interactions with Chad and Lori, where she kind of doesn't know her place in this group. So, like, I think, like specifying what level of darkness someone was, I think for Lori and Chad felt like an overstep because that was their job. And and contrary to what Melanie Gibb said, like she said that Chad was the one who assigned the light and dark ratings, but that is absolutely not. Oh, and named the demons, that the names came from Chad. That is absolutely not true. Both of those things are not true, but that's on par with Melanie Gibb. For the most part, if either Melanie's mouths are moving, they are probably lying. And I mean, obviously, there's a little bit of hyperbole in there, but not a lot. But so I think Melanie Gibb was trying to do Lori a favor and trying to make it sound like Chad was really the ringleader and she was just kind of going along with things. But there's one document where Lori rated, I think it was more than 100 modern day people in the LDS church. Yeah, I think they were like bishops and prophets and different people. So it's all redacted. We don't know the names, but she also was the one who came up with the name Ned Schneider because that was a childhood friend of Charles who had died. She was also the one who came up with Hiplos, because we see evidence, and we'll get to this at some point in the timeline. 2 days after she named Hiplos and specified that the H was silent, 2 days later, we have artifacts on Chad's phone or his computer where he was Googling Hiplos. So he was behind the eight ball on some of these things. So I think they kind of had a push me pull you thing where sometimes Lori was leading and Chad was trying to keep up, and other times Chad was leading. Anyway, okay, so all right, so this is a common theme. She thinks she's under attack. I've also been I've also been under attack since the vision started. They're attacking my head with lots of pain. They can't enter my heart. I've been casting out a lot. I have a question, and this is another theme with Zulema. So again, she wants to ingratiate herself to both Chad and Lori. So she's very subservient to both of them, not just to Chad and Lori. And one of the ways that she expresses this deference and attempts to like acknowledge that they are the leaders and she's more of a follower is that she just asks endless questions. And anyway, so this is one of them. I have a question. How do I shield myself better when I'm under these attacks? So Chad replied, "Hi, Zulema. Thanks for your message. I'm grateful you are having visions, and I'm sorry you are being attacked. You must be on the right track. You had spiritual weapons in your head, and I have removed them and healed the damage." Now, this is also a common theme. Zulema will talk about being under attack. Chad's like, "Oh, I removed these weapons. I've, done all of these different things." And then Zulema replies, "Oh my gosh, I feel so much better." So anyway, okay. "And I have removed them and healed the damage. I strengthened your spiritual helmet. I have captured and bound the current ones attacking you." Zulema: "Thank you, Chad. I appreciate your help. I'm realizing how fear and doubt can weaken me and they can enter to cause damage. I'm also learning that I was preordained to do this work, and the windows of heaven are opening for me each time I go to the temple. I'm so grateful to know you. Thank you for responding to my text." And one thing I will give Chad is that he is much kinder to Zulema than Lori is. Lori frequently ghosts her. Now, there are times where Zulema goes way off the rails with Chad and he just won't reply because they're too weird even for Chad. But Chad does tend to be like more kind with her than Lori. Lori will ignore her, ghost her. And then when Zulema, especially when Zulema started feeding her murderous desires, then Lori will just love bomb. I mean, she'll just love bomb and actually say things like, "I couldn't do any of this without you," which is chilling in retrospect. Okay, so I'm so grateful to know you. Thank you for responding to my text. Chad, you are a wonderful woman, and I'm grateful to know you too. Keep me posted on how things are going when you get a chance. And yeah, I guess I might as well just finish this up. It's pretty hard to read some of this stuff. But Zulema said, "I woke up this morning and the first thing I heard was, 'I have made you mine.' And it was a man's voice, not my voice. I believe I'm on the right path and I'm getting closer. I feel so much better today than in the past week. So all you did for me worked. I'm starting to feel myself again. Chad, I'm so happy to hear that you are feeling better. Yes, you are on the right path. Zulema, yes, I feel it." Okay, next day, Melanie Gibb and Lori introduced their new podcast, Time to Warrior Up. Now, this first podcast kicks off with Jason Mow. And this podcast, we actually, thanks to Denise Rainey, who was a podcaster early on and died, I think, in 2020. Wonderful, wonderful woman. But she had downloaded a bunch of these podcasts and thankfully published this one before she died. So if you're so inclined to listen to it, I mean, they just gush all over each other. But anyway, so they kick off this podcast, and I mean, we haven't even gotten to 2019 yet. So December 8th, so that was December 5th, December 8th. Now, one thing I will go back and mention is I think I mentioned this last week, but when Lori recorded her weird testimony, well, actually, she shared the testimony. Melanie Gibb recorded it. I believe that part of the reason for the recording was to pass on to Chad and Jason Mow and some of the guys in this group. So I also suspect, well, anyway, I won't get too off track here. Okay. Now this I talked about last week because there was a tie-in, but on December 8th, this was the first time Chad mentioned that he sealed away evil spirits in a text message to Zulema. I made a note about that because in the light and dark ratings for her family members, he noted that Joseph Ryan, my brother, was a very dark spirit and was sealed away. And so I think that in Chad's mind, he had the power to send Joe to hell, and that because he was sealed away, I think the significance of that was that was supposed to communicate comfort to her, like, don't worry about that guy. He will never bother you again, even in death. Like that seemed to be a concern for Lori. Anyway, Chad was just, he was getting into getting his grips in with Lori by communicating protection. Okay. All right. And so sometime in January, Lori started sending Chad videos of her dancing, and this was at Chad's request. So it says here at 9:36, he added, and this was Charles, and this was a confrontation that Charles sent Chad. And does your wife know you have several of Lori's dance videos? Explain how that is in any way appropriate. She sent them to you at your request in January. So a little bit of backstory with this. This was in late June 2019. This was pretty soon before Charles was killed. Charles had seen that he accessed Lori's email account, and he said that she left a computer open. Anyway, he found this email that Lori had sent to Chad as Charles. So she created this fake email address and asked Chad if he would come and help Charles write a book, and that just kind of caused things to blow up. So Charles was confronting Lori, he confronted Chad, he threatened to reach out to Tammy, and then he did reach out to Tammy. I strongly suspect that Tammy never saw the email that he sent her because he sent it to her work email address. This was the summer. But he had already given Lori and Chad a heads up that he was, I think he just told Lori that he was reaching out to Tammy. But I think that gave Chad enough time to intercept these emails. Okay. All right. So also in January 2019, JJ Vallow's autism medication, risperidone, was filled for the last time. Here is the source, but I also pulled out the quote. This was from the affidavit of probable cause for Lori Vallow after she was arrested. This was the affidavit that came out of Idaho. It said, during the search of Lori's apartment, police found an autism medication prescribed to JJ. It was filled in January 2019 and still had 17 pills in the bottle, according to the documents. Police verified that the prescription has not been filled in Idaho. Other notables from the affidavit of probable cause specific to this is that Lori's former neighbors in Rexburg reported that JJ was easily angered, out of control, and playing outside unsupervised. Now, I've talked about this playing outside unsupervised note before in other lives, but I don't want to leave any stone unturned. When I read that, that just really gripped me because when I stayed with them in Queen Creek in 2018, so I was there in May 2018, they had to take so many measures to make sure that JJ couldn't get out the front door because he was a runner. So they had an extra lock installed, and we had to keep the key up on this high shelf next to the door so that even if JJ grabbed a chair and dragged it over, he wasn't able to reach the key because if he would go out the front door, he would just start running. And they described other times, where they had to chase him down, find him in the neighborhood. So, there was one time where, I don't know, I had come in before Lori. I think she went out to run an errand, and she actually called me. I think there was something, and I remember her, or no, I think maybe I went for a run, but anyway, but she asked me, did you put the key back up on the shelf? So they took, like, well, these precautions to make sure JJ got out. So this thought of him just being in Rexburg, knowing that he's by nature a runner, that this was before we knew for sure that the kids were deceased. But I remember thinking, like, oh, she wanted him to die of natural causes, because that was just so against the protocols they had in place to make sure that he couldn't get away. And now here he is playing outside unsupervised and unmedicated, and without his dad, without his dog, I mean, just all of these things. It just seemed like Lori was just hoping that he would run away, get picked up, whatever. She wanted him gone. Okay. Um, one of her neighbors also said that Lori never told them that JJ was autistic. And when neighbors confronted her about JJ's behavior and lack of supervision, she told two different neighbors that JJ was her niece's drug baby. You can click through to these sources if you want to learn more. Also, we know from the divorce documents that Charles had filed, this was early in 2019. He retracted them, but when he filed them, he made a note that when Lori took off, she also took JJ's medication. Now, she didn't take JJ, but she took his medication. I think she also took his iPad and something with Bailey's collar. It was some kind of like specialized collar. So it was pretty clear even from back then. And we'll see when we get to that part in the timeline. Like, Charles actually tells someone, that Lori wants both of us gone. So that was very accurate. Okay. All right. Now, on January 1st, Lori and Charles moved to Gilbert. Now, I picked that up from This was from the body cam footage. This was when Charles this was when like he couldn't get into the house, and Lori had gone into their business account, wiped it clean, and he alleged that she also said like she could kill him with her powers, and just a lot of craziness. So he called Gilbert Police. He had also put in multiple calls to Zach Vallow, asking him to bring a key because Charles had his key in his truck, and someone had taken his truck from the airport. So Charles, at that point, he didn't have money. He didn't have access to he didn't have the key to get in the house, and no one was answering his calls because Zach lived at the house when I was there. So when all of this went down in January, Zach was still living with them. So let's listen to this.
We just moved up January 1st. And I think I know the code on the garage. I don't know if they changed it or not. I think I know the code. We just moved up January 1st.
It's a little muffled, but he said, we just moved in January 1st. No, the location of this house was significant because their bishop, Gabe Bonilla, lived right around the corner. And he mentions that elsewhere in the body cam. Now, Gabe was also one of these group members. He and Jason Mow are business partners, and Jason was very involved in this group. From the records that we have, he's now tried to distance himself, but Gabe, will see the role that he plays, where he could have really stepped up and helped Charles, and did just the opposite, really dismissed him. I mean, to the point of saying like that Lori wasn't a terroristic threat, which is just absolutely bizarre. Like no one was saying that they thought she was going to blow up a building. Charles was saying he was afraid for his life. He pulled Gabe Bonilla into a conversation, and and unfortunately didn't record it. And Gabe really just kind of left him hanging. We'll get to that very soon. Okay. So they move there. I think that location is significant because now they're close to Gabe Bonilla. He is now their bishop, and we'll see the role that all of that plays a little bit later on. January 5th, Zulema first mentions Julie Clement to Lori and says she receives visions, revelations, and messages. So there are quite a few details about Julie Clement. So I actually pulled them together and shared them in Cool Cats maybe a week and a half ago or something. And I'm going to go through that post because she doesn't really get a lot of airtime, but I do think that she was a fairly significant player in all of this, which we'll see. Okay, so, yep. Let me go back to the beginning. All right. First of all, and this was something I didn't know, someone else in the group, I try not to share names because this is a private group, but someone else had written up this post about Julie Clement last year, but I didn't see it. And so I just saw it recently, and then I wanted to share her finding, but then also just decided to pull together other details because she just doesn't, like I said, doesn't get a lot of airtime. So the first thing that I'll point out is that this is the first mention of Julie. So Zulema was friends with Julie and wanted to pull her into this group. So this was January 5th. Zulema said, I'm beyond excited about your visit to Arizona. I am looking forward to you teaching us. I have a friend I feel needs to be there Monday night, Julie Clement. She's receiving visions, revelations, and messages. I really want you to meet her. Is it okay if I invite her? Lori replied, yes, that would be great to have her come. I'm excited to see you too. Zulema, oh, I'm so excited for your visit. Lori, you were on the right track about the just men and women made perfect. It's just some strange interaction they had. Hopefully, we can get a chance to talk Monday afternoon. Zulema, I'm taking Monday off so I can be available at any time. I mean, this again is a solid theme for Zulema. Like, she has very few boundaries and she is just available for them at any time. We'll see, like, the day before Halloween, Lori texted her and was like, "Hey, Alex and Melanie, then Boudreaux are going to be in town. Can they stay at your place? They could stay at a hotel, but your place is more protected or something like that." And Zulema's like, "Oh, sure, I'll stay with uh, Kara, her daughter." And and it's Halloween, and so she's like, I mean, it would be kind of crazy because it's Halloween, and she'll have her grandkids. And Lori's like, oh yeah, I forgot it was Halloween. Anyway, very, very strange. But Zulema is just absolutely desperate, kowtows to them, and is always available. Another point about Julie is, you can see here from this Facebook post, she married this man, Mike Clement, and he was a bishop. So at the time that all of this was going on, so this is August 2019. I don't know how long he had been a bishop at that point, but I mean, she's married to a bishop. So just going to tuck that away. And then, okay, so there were, to contrast some of her claims or to support them, I will at times merge two screenshots just so that it's a little easier to see. So she had sent a text at some point describing Hiplos. So Hiplos was Charles. This was the second demon, evil spirit that had overtaken him. And as the story goes, each time a new evil spirit overtook him, it would be stronger, more powerful. So Julie had shared something about seeing Hiplos as a dragon. So this is her being interviewed. It says Detective Pillar or Pilar, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, specifically asked Julie about the name Hiplos. Julie indicated that Hiplos was the term for dark energy, but she was unaware that anyone was actually referred to by this name. I will prove that to be false in the next screenshot, I think. Julie indicated that they all prayed in a circle at the house, and she told them Hiplos was a dragon. So they're all in this prayer circle, which we'll also talk about in a minute. And she sees Hiplos as a dragon. And we see here, this is Chad, because anytime something says sent, that's Zulema. If it says read, that's either Chad or Lori. So this was June 1st. This is leading up to Charles' murder. Chad had told Zulema, Lori texted me about what Julie, this Clement, saw about Hiplos looking like a dragon. And yeah, he says something probably like friggin' whatever, but fascinating. And Zulema said, she sees things that I can't. The spirit led me there, so I went with it. I am waiting on the Lord. Let's see what happens. So next up, she was part of this August prayer circle. So a little bit of background with this August prayer circle. David Warwick had come into town. So Melanie Gibb, according to Melanie, well, she told Nate that she didn't know for 4 days that Charles was dead, which is absolutely insane. But she told investigators during one of her interviews that she didn't know for 5 days. So Melanie has a difficult time keeping all of her stories straight because she has so many. But then, like right after supposedly finding out that Charles was killed, she sends out this invitation to her email list, inviting people to like her next get together, and said David Warwick would be speaking at that. And it was going to be at Lori's house, which was the house that a man had just been murdered in less like a week before. So I think she must have gotten some kind of pushback because she ended up changing the location there. Who knows? Maybe someone who was part of this group had a conscience or part of a conscience and said, you know what, that's just way too creepy. So we don't know everyone who was there that Friday night. We don't know if the prayer circle happened that Friday night or if it happened later. I think that Friday night was maybe like August 2nd. David Warwick talked about it when he testified. He said that this was the first time he had met Lori. But I've been able to like kind of piecemeal together in these different documents who was part of which prayer circle. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of prayer circles that we don't know about because even when Melanie Gibb was asked about how many, she really, really hesitates and you can tell she's trying to throw out as small of a number as possible. And I think she said something like, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10, which is like a ridiculous number of these prayer circles. And also we'll get more into what these prayer circles do, but like some of them, like Serena really tries to tamp down the whole idea of the prayer circle, saying that it was just like, someone praying for someone to be released from an evil spirit. And we find out, no, that is absolutely not the point of these prayer circles. These prayers were unto death, not unto salvation. They were because in their thinking, the person has already been overtaken by an evil spirit. So the only way for them to be free from this evil spirit was for their body to die because they were in limbo and their body had to die for them to be free to move on to their next probation, unless they, like Joe, most likely Tylee, were sealed away. So the list I have so far for the August prayer circle were obviously Lori, Chad, both Melanies, Zulema, Alex, Julie. But we also know David was there. So I don't know why he wasn't included in this list. And according to Melanie, David has like blocked it all out. He doesn't remember anything. Okay, so Julie had also said that Hyplos was merely the term for dark energy, but she was unaware that anyone was actually referred to by this name. As I'm going through these documents, it's like a game of memory because I'm like, I don't think so. Because on July 12th, Zulema texted Julie, oh, okay, we don't know what that is in reference to. Now, these names have been confirmed because this was in the affidavit of probable cause that came out of Chandler, which was a heavily redacted document. But then I found the entire affidavit of probable cause in the police report completely unredacted. So I have I have a video where I just read through the affidavit of probable cause and I filled in all of the redactions just so that people could see like they do fit, like everything fit in the redactions. So Zulema said to Julie, Hyplos is gone. It was a Nephi and Laban ending. I will tell you more when I see you in person or when you see Lori in person. I'm leaving for Chile on Monday for 2 weeks. And then we don't know what Julie said, but Zulema said, right? I'm just happy it's over. So clearly, Julie wasn't like horrified, like, what? No, this is terrible. So we don't know what she said, but she seemed to be pretty down with all of this. But you can see here, obviously, she knew that someone, meaning Charles, was actually referred to by the name Hiplos. So, it kind of makes sense. These people, I'm sure they feel a tremendous amount of shame that they were involved in all of this, but they should, because all of these people knew that these victims were being targeted. And the August prayer circle, I mean, obviously that wasn't for Charles. Not that that would have been on any level okay, but we know that they had prayer circles to pray for Charles to die. And Melanie even said in a very bizarre interview with Keith Morrison from Dateline, she was like, oh, like she was saying something to the effect of she was very surprised that Charles was shot, that she just thought they would say a prayer and his spirit would leave and he would just die if he really was a zombie. And the look on Keith's face is absolutely priceless. I mean, he's horrified by this. But so again and again, even in one of her interviews with law enforcement, she confirms, actually twice, she confirmed that they believed that in these prayer circles, everyone had different powers. So Zulema had powers over the elements. Serena had powers over water, and Melanie won't say what her power was. Either will Melanie, now Pulowski, then Boudreaux. So everyone had their powers, and they would use their powers to try to kill these victims. But so obviously, the beginning of August, they weren't praying for Charles anymore, and so most likely they were praying for the kids and possibly even Tammy. And I think it was Serena who actually kind of danced around that. Yeah, she thought they may have prayed for Tylee, because so everyone was really, really hesitant to say that they actually participated in prayers that they believed would murder children. But and Melanie Gibb, in her last interview with Lieutenant Ball and Detective Hermosillo, is tripping over herself to try to not reveal who they were praying for. But anyway, okay. So that was Julie's role. Oh wait, no, there was something else. Let me pull it up. This, I think, in my opinion, was the most damning. So this was on December 31st. It says, Detective McDermott, this is from the Gilbert Police report, I believe. Detective McDermott and I contacted and interviewed Lori's friend, Julie Clement. Julie identified herself as a spiritual healer for Lori, Chad, and Zulema. Julie said that she last talked with Lori and Chad via phone yesterday. So Lori and Chad are in Hawaii. They're in hiding. And Julie was so much in their inner circle that she talked with them while they were in Hawaii. Julie was asked to provide their updated phone numbers, but she refused. So she, I'm assuming, must have had their burner phone numbers, or at least one of them. So they asked for their updated phone numbers, and she just refused to share it with them. She denied knowledge about this is the kid's location or welfare. I provided Julie with my business card and encouraged her to call me if she remembered anything helpful. So just the fact that like she obviously knew at that point there were 2 kids who were missing, and she would not participate in the investigation. She wouldn't share Chad or Lori's cell phone numbers with investigators, which to me just shows the total lack of good faith, and that she was very much on Chad and Lori's side on this. Okay. Let's see. Okay, January 6th. This is the approximate date that Lori, Zulema, and other group members have a meeting. Zulema, we already saw this screenshot. Zulema takes the day off and asks Lori if she can bring Julie. On January 11th, Zulema claims to have a vision that she could create storms and fire and will, quote, have the eye of the Lord. Here we see Zulema had a vision that she could create storms and fire and will have the eye of the Lord. And I don't know what that bizarre statement means. On January 22nd, Chad emailed Lori some documents with family history records. So it's a little confusing to know exactly what this is, because we know that he sent her, and there was quite a bit of confusion for a while as to when did he actually send her the light and dark ratings for her family members. Because I found it in the Gilbert Police report, I'm pretty confident at this point that he sent it to her right after meeting her for the first time in person. I do believe that they most likely had communication before they actually met in person, but I do believe that October 26th was the first time they met in person. But then January 22nd, we know that he sent her an email with the subject line family history records. So I'm not exactly sure what these are, but Charles had intercepted this email. So he forwarded that email from Lori's account, her iCloud account, to his Gmail, and then passed it on to Kay. So you can see here, he forwarded it to Kay. This was in March. Kay doesn't forward it to Detective Moffat until August 22nd. So this is about 6 weeks after Charles was murdered. But anyway, we will see. That will most likely come out in the Chandler trial. It could possibly come out in the Idaho trial. We just don't know. Okay, this same day, according to Kay Woodcock, Chad emailed Lori to tell her Charles was overtaken by an evil spirit. And I'll just play this. This was part of their, I think, their first and only Dateline interview. They used parts of the Dateline interview in like other episodes of Dateline, but I think they just did one.
When Charles and sister Kay Woodcock and her husband Larry heard about what happened, right away their minds went to this.
He was ambushed.
He was ambushed. There's no doubt about it. It was premeditated. So Kay and Larry believed that killing was planned. But they were also pretty sure they knew when the plan was set in motion. January 22nd, 2019, 6 months before Charles was shot. That's when, according to Kay, Lori got an email from her new religious guru, Chad Daybell. The subject, a demon with a name, Nick Schneider.
Chad told Lori that that's who took over Charles's body.
So there's a little bit of confusion about this because the name wasn't actually Nick Schneider. It was Ned Schneider. And also, this email isn't included in the FOIA docs. So unless that was part of the email with the family history documents, we just don't know. But Melanie Gibb claimed that it was actually a phone call that Chad had called Lori, and that she was with Lori when Chad called her to tell her that Charles had been overtaken by a demon. Because if you think back to the light and dark ratings in October, right after Chad had stayed in Lori and Charles' home, he rated Charles a light spirit. I think it was a 2L, which that's a little confusing because according to the affidavit of probable cause for Idaho, they were plotting, conspiring to murder Tammy as early as October 1st, 2018, and started to conspire to murder the kids or to harm them October 26th. So that was when they met for the first time. Excuse me. So I'm sure a lot of this will be solidified at the trial, but whether it was from a phone call or an email, we know that at some point he identified Charles as a dark spirit. Okay, January 28th, Lori allegedly transferred $10,000 from Charles. No, it wasn't Charles' business account. It was both of their business account, but she transferred it into their personal account before moving the money into a new account from a new bank. And then she also transferred 2,000 of Charles' enterprise points to a personal account. Excuse me. Although Charles wouldn't discover the transfer until approximately February 6th, so about a week later. And then the next day, she transferred an additional 25,000 from the business account to the joint account, and then from the joint account to the same unknown account at Compass Bank, leaving the account at less than $1,000. But if we look at the ledger, she actually just keeps whittling away at this account until it was left with like a very insignificant amount. I forget what the final amount is. Let me see if I include it here, the ledger. But she made a payment on their credit card. She bought groceries at Walmart, and yeah, I think it was, I think it was ultimately left with under $100. Okay. All right. Then on January 30th, according to a petition for an order of protection that was filed by Charles against Lori made several more disturbing statements and threats in a phone call. I compile multiple sources. Again, you can feel free to check them out. But some of the things that she said was that she didn't trust him. She would need to kill him when he got home. She would have an angel there to dispose of his body. And also keep in mind, Charles was married to Lori when Alex tased Joe, and we found out from Adam Cox, Lori's other brother, that the original plan was for him to tase Joe, throw him in the trunk of his car, take him out to the desert, shoot him, and then no one would find the body. So for her to say she would have an angel there to dispose of the body, Charles would have some context for that. And he had very real reasons to be afraid. I believe that he knew very much what Lori and Alex were capable of. Okay. She knew his real name. I need to update this because some people said Nick Schneider, some people said Ned Snyder. There were all early on, there were all different versions of the name. Ultimately, it turned out, because Charles himself thought that she called him Nick Schneider, which she may have to obfuscate the fact that she was calling him by his childhood friend's name. So anyway, but he said that she knew his real name was Nick Schneider, and Lori had told him, Nick is your real name. Nick killed Charles and has taken his identity. And according to Charles, she also said he would have to go, and painfully. And she also threatened to destroy him financially, according to the documents. And that was evidenced by draining the account. I mean, it would be bad enough if she had just drained the account of $35,000. But the fact that she went back and just kept siphoning more and more money out of the account until it was, under $100, I just think showed an extraordinary level of cruelty. Like, she wanted him to have no resources. This was right before payday. He was freaking out, and didn't know how he was going to pay his employees as well as consultants. And on January 30th, Lori, again, allegedly canceled his flight home, which he found out when he actually arrived at the Houston airport. Charles bought a $600 last minute ticket to Phoenix. After his plane landed, he found out his truck was stolen from the airport parking lot. And then he comes to a house that had been emptied. So Charles also claimed that it took Lori 3 days to disclose where she'd left the truck. Charles was forced to rent a vehicle during that time, which then Melanie Gibb, when they went to Gilbert Police together, she talks about how, like, I think he had like a white SUV. And so she was like, oh, I don't know what that was about. So she was trying to make it sound like Charles was sketch for driving up in a car that wasn't his. Anyway, okay. All right. So we talked about this. Oh, yeah. So ultimately, she left the account with $61.53. She also hid his clothes and computer in what appeared to be an attempt to cripple him in his business, because if he didn't have his computer, how was he going to even be able to conduct business? And she even, according to Charles, even took his underwear. And, I already said she did this right before payroll was due, leaving him vulnerable to lawsuits. And yeah. She also took JJ's meds, his iPad, also his clothes, and Bailey's collar. And she changed the locks to the house. No, that's not true. That I need to update. He was the one who brought in a locksmith, but that was to repair the door that the police had kicked in. Okay. And then he had said she went MIA for 58 days. It actually ended up being 72 days. I talked about this in another live, but in reference to who moved the truck, there are 3 different people who have been accused of moving the truck. This one is kind of somewhat assumed, and I probably shouldn't list Melanie Gibb, but April, I think she had said it was a friend. Maybe she said, oh, that's right. Originally, in an interview, she said a friend had gone with Lori, but then when she was interviewed, she said Melanie was involved in the things that Lori did to Charles, like taking his things and moving his truck. So she pointed the finger at Melanie. Melanie Gibb pointed the finger at Alex. She said that Lori and Alex moved the truck. Melanie indicated that Alex took Lori to the airport to take the truck. But both Summer Shiflett, that's Lori's sister, and Colby Ryan, that's Lori's son, fingered Zach Cox as the culprit. So I pulled these together. I just highlight Summer so that you can see who she is referring to. She was also aware that they do this somewhat frequently. Like they'll redact the name, but then be like Adam's son. Took Charles' truck from the airport for Lori while Charles was out of town. And this was in Colby's interview. It says Lori also told Colby that Charles had been with hookers. Colby stated that while Charles was out of town, quote, they took his truck and threw his clothes away. Colby would later state that he knew. Then Zach Cox was the only name that fit in the redaction. And in this particular police report, every time they mentioned Zach, they spelled his name with an H. So he actually spells his name without an H, but throughout that document, his name was always spelled with an H. So he knew that Zach Cox was living with Lori and Charles at the time. So obviously that was Zach. He was living with them at that time. And Zach was the one who picked up the truck from the airport. Once Charles realized his truck was missing, Charles called Colby and asked him if he knew where his truck was. Colby had no idea where the truck was or what was going on. So we also know that, according to Charles, he had been trying to get a hold of Zach Cox for 10 days before this happened. And so Zach had ghosted him. I'm not saying this to shame Zach. I think from what I can kind of piecemeal together, I think until February, Zach was more team Lori, because when Lori identified Zach as like the last of the dark spirits, she actually says that it happened in February. And so I think in all of this that went down, I think Zach kind of shifted. But so, we'll find out at the trial. Okay, maybe if they think it's relevant. Okay, January 30th, Lori sent Janice, Summer, Melanie, and Alex a text asking them not to answer Charles if he called. She said, please do not answer the phone if Charles calls you. We are in a big argument and he is looking for people to be on his side. Thank you. I love you all. Also, January 30th, Lori disappears to an unknown location, according to then husband Charles. And we already, this is well established, but of course you can click through and read these. She was allegedly gone for 72 days. We know that part of this time was spent in Hawaii with Tylee, and they had gone and stayed with April Raymond. This was when April had said that Lori said that Charles was already dead. Then she updated it that he wasn't dead yet, but she expected to get a call any day that he had died. And Tylee was with her on that first trip. We also know from, I think it was April's interview with Dateline, that Alex had also come out on one of those visits. So Lori was back and forth between Arizona, Hawaii, and Idaho during these 72 days that she was gone. There may have been other locations. There was also a trip to Salt Lake City, which we'll get to. But so she was just kind of all over the place. But we'll find out when we get to this part in the timeline. She also stayed in Rexburg, right up the street from, well, I think it was like in a hotel in maybe downtown Rexburg. But, she was in Rexburg while Chad was still married to Tammy. Obviously, she also moved up to Rexburg while they were still married, but she went up to Rexburg very early on. Okay. All right. So January 30th, let's see. Chad conducted a Google search for Ned Schneider, Louisiana obituary, 1997. So this is the first time I have found any place where he was identified as Ned Schneider, not Nick Schneider. Melanie Gibb later on in her testimonies, she would refer to him as Ned Schneider. So here we okay. So he does this search. Let's pull that up. Oh, shoot. All right. I'll have to find that again. And Ned was a childhood friend of Charles who had died. Hopefully this. Okay, here we go. I then asked Melanie to tell me about the first time she heard the name Ned Schneider. She reported that it was in January of 2019. Melanie stated she was at Lori's house and Lori was on the phone with Chad. When Lori was off the phone with Chad, Lori told her that Chad advised her that Charles had become Ned Schneider. Melanie was aware that Charles was referred to as Ned, Garrett, or Garrick, and Hiplos. She was told that Hiplos was a combination of dark spirits. Melanie stated that Chad was the one who had come up with the names of the dark spirits, and Lori did not come up with these names. Again, that's not true. And also, Melanie was told that Ned was a childhood friend of Charles Vallow. So how would Chad have known that? Obviously, he would have found that out, most probably from Lori. Ned passed away and his spirit was trapped on Earth. Chad told them that Ned had been attached to Charles for years and studied his behaviors. Ned eventually pushed Charles' spirit out of his body and took it over. When this happened, Charles' spirit moved on and Charles was now gone. And this is very essential because this is how this group justified murder right here in their minds. Once they're overtaken by a demonic spirit, there was no redeeming them. There was no getting them back. Their spirit was pushed out. And we know because Ian documented this group's beliefs that when their spirit was pushed out, they were then in limbo, and the only way to free them was to kill the bodies so that they could move on to their next probation. Okay. Also, January 30th, I mean, a lot went down between January 30th and January 31st. Lori sent a text to Kay Woodcock that caused Charles to be, quote, shocked beyond belief when he read it. He said Kay sent it to him February 1st, but his response sounds like it was her allegation that he had cheated on her. Let's see. Let me open this up so we can zoom in. Whoa. Lori, the purpose of this email is, again, to try and establish a family connection with you and our son. Also clarify the facts as I've seen them, regardless of where you want to go with a divorce. It's been, at that point, 38 days since you've made any contact with us. This is necessary because when I saw Alex this past Saturday, and we'll get to this in the timeline, he made me aware that I had somehow, quote, taken JJ and tried to put you in jail. So you can see Lori was working on Alex to gear him up, to show him Charles was dangerous. Now he had taken JJ, when in reality, Lori was the one who took off. And we also know that for part of that time, she was with Alex. And then according to one neighbor, she and Alex had a big blow up fight. This was, I think, out on his cul-de-sac. And then she left Alex's and went to Hawaii. So anyway, what Alex said was confusing. I was really further confused that the entire family has refused contact, not just with me, but also JJ. So, at this point, it's been 38 days. And according to Charles, no one in the family, so Tylee, Colby, Lori's parents, extended family, no one was even in touch with JJ. Lori, on January 30th, I received a call from you stating that we were done. All my stuff was gone from the house, et cetera, et cetera. Let me see. Okay. On the next day, feel free to read this on your own, but on the next day, Kay received a text from you. She didn't tell me about it till Friday, February 1st. I was shocked beyond belief when I read it. In case you don't recall, here it is. It's redacted. Lori, if it somehow makes you feel better to make these kinds of accusations, then I certainly can't stop you. But for the record, you and I both know it's ridiculous. You are my one and only for 14 years, period. Only after hearing this from Alex did I begin to put the pieces together. So this isn't exactly true. We'll get to this part in the timeline. There are some parts of this timeline, they're really uncomfortable because there was a period of months where Charles was being catfished by scammers. And at one point, according to the FOIA docs, he was in touch with, or I think it had G-chat conversations with, I think it was 14 different women, but they were separated at this time. But according to their beliefs, they were still married. And anyway, okay, January 31st, Charles had also told Lori not to go to the temple because her temple recommend had been suspended. So this was 7:25 in the morning. Charles sent Lori a text message that read, "Your phone is active. I want no trouble. Excuse me. Just let me have my truck and clothes and I'll leave." Charles then added, "And I have no money. We have to pay the rent tomorrow. What should I do? Will you let us use some of the money you took? Otherwise, I'll have to call Peter and tell him we'll be late." Charles then texted, "Please don't go to work today." And you can tell he was referring to doing work in the temple because he said, "Your recommend has been suspended." So her temple recommend had been suspended pending further review. Obviously, it was reactivated. So we don't know how long it was suspended. And okay, this is again January 31st. This was when Lori and Melanie Gibb and Tylee went to Gilbert Police Department. But on that day, Jason Mow met up with Melanie Gibb, and he claimed that he just happened to be in Lori's neighborhood visiting Gabe Bonilla, who lived around the corner from Lori and Charles, and pulled off to the side of the road to send a text. And while he was pulled over, Melanie Gibb was driving through Lori's neighborhood and just happened to see him and stopped to tell him about Lori and Charles' big fight. Then he tells her to go to the police station with Lori. So we'll end on January 31st. I just want to get through this day. So this was, okay. I called Jason, obviously this is Mal, to ask him about what I had learned. I told him about the recording that was made on January 31st. Melanie, it wasn't a recording. It was a conversation that Gabe Bonilla had been pulled into by Charles Vallow. Melanie had mentioned a person by the name of Gabe. Gabe was also the name of the person with Charles when he was attempting to have Lori picked up with the mental health pickup order. Jason recalled that this was the time when Melanie had reached out to him for advice. He said that it had been about 6 months since they had last talked. Jason said he was at Gabe's house as Gabe was a business partner with Jason. Jason had pulled over near the house, near Lori's house, to use his phone. So, I mean, like, Charles actually pointed to Gabe Bonilla's house, like when he was standing outside the house. So he was that close. But apparently, according to Jason, even though he had just left Gabe's house, he just happened to pull over to send a text. Okay. When Melanie stopped, she told Jason about all the things going on with Lori, and he told her to have Lori get the order. Jason could not recall if the conversation had anything to do with the purse, I'm sure. Jason confirmed this event was the one he had been talking about when he was interviewed July 27th. This was the first time he had contact with her since they stopped doing the podcast together. Okay. I know. Also, I asked him if this was the last contact he had with Melanie, and he stated there may have been another time when he was called, but he couldn't remember the details. Okay, whatever. He knew they had talked after Charles had been killed. Okay. And Jason believed the brief conversation with Melanie was about Lori having the truck and other issues. Jason said he just recommended getting the police involved and returning the property. So this was Melanie's account is absolutely bizarre. So let's listen to that.
Yeah, it was very smart. Yeah, and Jason's what was really cool because I was sitting there and coming out of the neighborhood after he conned me to go to the house. And
so she said, I was sitting there in the neighborhood after he, meaning Charles, conned her to come to the house because Charles had Lori's cell phone. And he, according to Melanie, he used Lori's cell phone to get her to come to the house.
I pull over, by the pool. And then I see this guy that I know, just our good friend, just right in front of me on the side of the road. And I'm like, that looks like Jason. I'm like, hold on, that's Jason. He's a police guy. I'm gonna go. So I'm like, Jason, what are you doing over here? I thought I was just going to visit you.
Oh, yeah?
I'm like, hey, I just want to know what's going on. He goes, yeah, go down to the police office now.
He's police guy. So I'm sure Jason is dying 1,000 deaths that Lori interjected our good friend because he is tripping over himself, trying to distance himself. Also on January 31st, Lori's sister, Summer Shiflett, texts Lori at 8:55 to give her a heads up that Charles had arranged a psych eval because Gabe was on the phone when she threatened him, and said he also said she had been, or no, he was on the phone when she said she had been married to Moroni. Summer also tells Lori that she knows she has, quote, help from the other side, and that she knew Lori was, quote, prepared to do her mission. She said, your mission. So I'll just read the quote. You can open it up. He talked to Jeff and Mimi this morning and told them that you left him, and he called the police. This was, let me clarify. He in this text is Charles. And then he called the police, and if they track you down, they are taking you in for a psych eval. He told Mimi that he had someone from, what, I don't know how to pronounce that, or a stake presidency listening in on a conversation, this was Gabe Nia, that you had with him where you told him you would kill him and that you are married to Moroni and that whoever was listening was going to have your recommend suspended until they talk to you. No, one thing is that we don't actually, I should clarify, we don't actually know if her recommend was suspended because I think Charles, by including Gabe in this call, I think he thought he had her dead to rights. Like, okay, Gabe actually heard her say these things, and so he's going to testify. He'll tell the police, and this is going to help me get this psych eval. But in the end, like I said, Gabe was not helpful to Charles at all. So we don't even know for sure that her temple recommend had been suspended. I don't think we know that for sure. Okay, I just want you to know what we are hearing on our end. I want you to know that I 100% support you. This is very much a Cox thing. I am here if there is anything I can do for you to help. The fact he would try to get your recommend suspended shows extreme evil and malicious intent. I know you have help from the other side. So clearly, Summer was part of this group. She's also listed at one point in the police report as being part of this group. Oddly enough, Melanie Gibb was not included in that list, but we'll get to that. But I know that you have help from the other side. I know you are being inspired to know what to do, and you are prepared to do your mission. I support you. I love you. I am here for you. I am so sorry you have to go through all this crap. So clearly, Summer is not only just Team Lori, she's feeding her this information. So Lori acts surprised when she goes into the police station and finds out that Charles had gotten a psych eval awarded, but she actually already knew before she went to the police station. So January 31st, Lori's compelled to report to the Gilbert Police Station, and police are also informed about a petition for an involuntary hold at Community Bridges. Originally, it was a voluntary hold, but then it turned into an involuntary hold. Police say Lori would be allowed to go to the facility willingly to talk to staff. If she did not, she would be taken involuntarily. And I've talked about this at length in the Cool Cats group, but one of the Gilbert police officers actually gave Lori tips on how to evade a pickup for the psych eval on 9 different occasions during the interview, going so far as to say he didn't know how they, like meaning the other police officer who was in the room, the more junior police officer, and and whoever else was involved in this, how they were going to, quote, get that to go away, and even diagnosed her on the fly, saying, but just talking to you, I mean, I don't see you being a danger to yourself or anybody else. You get your kids to school. And I think he actually said on time, but there weren't kids. There was only one kid because Tylee had graduated she didn't graduate. She had gotten her GED. And anyway, you can check out that part of the video. I mean, it's really bizarre just how much he trips over himself, even telling her that if police do come to her door, that as long as there's a barricade, so he encourages her not to open the door or open it all the way, because if there's a barricade, like he says, I think a couple different times, like they're not going to kick down the door. But anyway, so he's giving her tips on, even in the event that police come to the door, here's how to evade this psych eval. Later, Melanie Gibb would say that she went with Lori to the psych eval and that she passed with flying colors. I do not believe that. I think Melanie Gibb, once again, is lying, because Charles said that Lori was a no-show. This was in the court documents, and that he thought that at that point the pickup order had expired. And I am more inclined to believe what Charles said in those in the divorce documents than really anything that Melanie Gibb says, because it doesn't even make sense. Like she even said, like, she waited outside as if like she's dropping someone off to like get her braces tightened or something. Like she wouldn't just be able to like sit in the parking lot and just wait for a psych eval. If she had actually had a psych eval, it would have been hours, not minutes. And anyway, just the whole thing was very, very weird. She also said that I think Tylee had driven them. Excuse me. It's just, it makes no sense, but Melanie makes no sense. We also know on January 31st, Charles is blocked on Brandon Boudreaux's phone. So this was kind of weird. So on September 30th, it says that this was part of the Gilbert Police report. It says, I met with Brandon Boudreaux to take custody of a smartphone that contained correspondence between Brandon and Charles Vallow. This was 2020. The smartphone was a Samsung Note 8. Brandon believed Charles' correspondence was blocked from communicating with him on January 31st. Now, this was when they had their big blow-up fight, and Charles had broken into Lori's car and had taken her purse. So Brandon said that the only other person who had access to the Samsung at that time was Melanie Boudreaux. Brandon went on to explain that he allowed his son to use the device to play games since July of 2019, near the time of Charles Vallow's homicide. Brandon recently went through the Samsung for old photographs when he discovered 24 unread text messages from Charles between January and July. And this is pretty on brand for Charles. Like the fact, like if I send someone a text message and they didn't reply, I mean, they would get at max, like possibly one more text message. If I didn't get a reply, I would assume I'm being ghosted. Like Charles was so desperate, there were 24 text messages that were unread. And so these might have been group messages, but clearly there wasn't communication between Charles and Brandon. And Brandon tries to say that this was Melanie, but police weren't really buying this, so they actually go through. I'm not going to go through all of the, all of the details. But he said that the messages were found in a folder titled something like AT&T blocked folder. Brandon said this was consistent with his phone forwarding Charles calls directly to voicemail. So there were also calls. We don't know how many, but Charles had called him, left voicemails, and hadn't gotten responses from Brandon between the end of January 2019 through July 2019. So Charles was blocked on Brandon's phone right up until his death. So it's kind of weird that Lori, in her, suspicious mind, identified Brandon as one of these kind of co-conspirators, because she was saying that Charles was planning to murder her for the life insurance, and she thought he was being helped by Adam and Brandon. But it sounds like Brandon and Charles had no communication during this time, because obviously, like if they had gotten together, Charles would have said something about, hey, like I haven't gotten any returns, from my text messages, and you haven't called me back. Excuse me. So he signed a consent to search form, and they did an analysis. Basically, the long and the short of it is they said, that in Charles' contact, there was something that would have indicated that he was blocked, because there was something that said unblock caller, and also we'll see a little bit later that Brandon called him one day in March and they talked for 10 minutes. The next day, Charles called him back, but the number had been forwarded to voicemail, and police noted that it was obvious that he was still blocked. So apparently, now I'm an iPhone user, but I did some research, and with Android, if you block someone, you can still call that person and you can send text messages to that person. But if they text message you back, or if they call you back, the text messages will be forwarded to like a blocked folder, and the calls will be forwarded to voicemail, and you won't get like notifications about it. Excuse me. So I think their conclusion was that this most likely was Brandon's action to block Charles, not Melanie. Okay. All right. So we will leave off here, and for the next one, we will pick up in February 2019. As I mentioned last week, I'm not going to do Q&A for these lives. I want to keep them a little bit shorter. But if you have any questions, please drop them in the comments. I generally drop in anywhere from 1 to maybe 3 times a week to answer questions. So I will answer questions that way. All right. Have a wonderful evening and a wonderful new year. Bye, guys.